All right, welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals who are building accessible products or businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but give them a platform to share their ideas and amplify their voice. Today, I'm joined by Kim Knackstedt. Kim has a PhD in special education and policy from the University of Kansas, was a Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. Public Policy Fellow, a disability policy advisor in the U.S. House of Representatives, and then later in the U.S. Senate. In January of 2021, Kim was appointed as the first ever Director of Disability Policy for the Domestic Policy Council for the Biden-Harris administration. Following her experience in the White House, Kim was a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, Director of the Disability Economic Justice Team, and Director of the Disability Economic Justice Collaborative. Now she runs Unlock Access, an accessibility and disability policy consulting firm. And all of those experiences have led you to this moment and appearance on the prestigious AdaptX podcast. Congratulations. But all jokes aside, thank you for being here and your willingness to have this conversation. I'm really looking forward to learning from you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I similarly pursued a degree in special ed before pivoting to the career that I have now. So maybe what initially influenced you to advocate on behalf of people with disabilities or pursue a degree in education? And then maybe what experiences led you to pivot away from the classroom?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, my background doesn't seem, traditional by any means, seeing that I started as a teacher and, ended up in the White House and now doing this. But, when I look back on it, and I'm asked this question a lot, like what got you into it? I ride horses, and when I was in high school, the barn I rode at actually had a hippotherapy program, so therapeutic riding program. And so I spent a lot of my weekends volunteering at that program because I had experience with horses. So the physical therapist would be with the kids, and then I would lead the horses. And I loved doing that. It was so much fun. It never really seemed like work. I really enjoyed it. And I thought, this is the career I'll have. I'm going to become a physical therapist. I'm going to open a hippotherapy program. As I got older, I realized that's actually very hard to do. It's also very expensive. Horses are not an inexpensive thing to have, especially trying to run a program like that. So what I realized is what I really enjoyed was actually working with kids. And as my career went on, something I also realized is I so identified with the kids because I have chronic illnesses. I didn't really come into that identity until a little bit later in my life, but I was identified with many of the kids as well and saw myself sort of in them and working with them. So that really drove me into a degree in special education. I loved working with kids. I loved teaching. I actually taught for 4 years and loved it. I taught K through 6 students with disabilities. I was in Kansas City because I was working on my graduate degree as well at the University of Kansas. And I loved it for a while. It was great. But I really started to see the ableism and the racism, words I have now to describe what I was witnessing, that was so embedded in the system and how my students were treated. And that started to drive me away from wanting to just be a teacher. And I started to see these systemic problems. And like the kids I taught had pretty severe mental health diagnoses and had been deemed, I'm using air quotes, the problem behavior kids, which was such a terrible way to describe them because it was the system and the structure and the context that was the problem. It had nothing to do with them. And at 4th grade, I had other teachers coming up to me saying that the kids were going to end up in jail. Why was I bothering? I was crushed by that. And I realized like I needed to do something different. As one teacher in my early 20s, this was not the path to like success. I left teaching, got a PhD to really dig into kind of systems change and how to make a difference. And that sort of set me on the trajectory that I'm on now.
That has some similarities or parallels to like the social model of disability, I suppose. Like in the course we teach, we start the first modules on the social versus the medical model, because I think most people in the fitness space view the impairments associated with disabilities and They want to learn about the
Yeah,
diagnoses, et cetera. When ultimately we talk about how you're training the individual in front of you, you're not training a label. So I think that social lens
totally.
is an interesting perspective, and I don't think many people are exposed to it unless they're like in this space.
Yeah,
So
I
basically, that
agree.
your disability is a product of your environment, not necessarily
Yeah,
physical characteristics that you possess. So that's, I think, is an important lens to see a lot of these things through.
yeah.
When you were in your PhD program, is that when you were first introduced to more like government responsibilities or policy?
It is. It is. And to be honest, coming from education, and you may have kind of seen the same thing, is I really thought the way to make change at a systems level was actually kind of state, because so much of education is governed at the state and local level. And so my thought was, okay, I'm going to go get a PhD, then I'll go back to like the state or local level, and I'll start making change in kind of the education system that way. But as I took classes, and this is the thing about the PhD, I learned a lot, but what I actually really learned is how to think differently. And like the content was great. I learned the University of Kansas has one of the top programs in special education in the country. So I learned from some of the best faculty that are out there. But I really learned how to just think about problems and come up with different solutions and apply different lenses over everything. And that was the skill, that like skill set is, I think, what actually gave me what I needed to be successful in the future more than anything. But I started to think about, was the state and local system and the levers, was that really what I wanted to be pulling on for policy? I did an internship at the Kansas State Department of Education, loved the people, loved the work, realized not for me, um, and had the opportunity to apply for the Kennedy Fellowship that you mentioned in my intro, which anyone listening who ever wants to get into policy, I highly, highly recommend it. It's really the only fellowship for the federal government that is focused on disability. You can be, in your mid career, you can be early career, you can be late career, you can be a person with a disability, you can be a family member. If you want to know disability policy, you should apply. And I can send you the link for the show notes. It's a really great fellowship, and I thought there was no way I'd get it. Right, it's one person a year. Um, so applied, and then a very quick turnaround. Did an interview in December, like middle December. They told me the next day that I got the fellowship, and I needed to be in DC again, like move to DC by beginning of January. Um, so my husband and I went back to Kansas, packed up our things, and we've been in DC ever since.
Yeah, we
So
work with the University of Kansas's Down
yeah.
syndrome program
Oh yeah,
on a research project. They have a really strong team of professors there that have a lot of
they do.
publications on Down syndrome and physical activity.
Yeah.
So working with a couple professors there, that's been a great project. But what was your pitch for the Kennedy Fellow? Did you have to present a project or a specific idea? Or?
You sort of just write. It's like a cover letter, but not. It's like 4 pages, just like, why should it be you? Which is
Mhm.
so weird. And I really laid out that, and this has actually been, not to be too academic-y, but that I see the value in connecting research, policy, and practice. This has been like my conceptual framework actually since my PhD program, and something that I still use sort of everywhere I go. And I see it, people joke I should get a tattoo of this, but I see it as like a triangle almost, but like where research, policy, and practice all have like like arrows, bidirectional arrows to them. Everything is connected, and one isn't elevated over the other. And you know, research connects to policy, and they drive each other. You can't have one without the other. And but practice is there too. What's happening on the ground is driving the others. And this is true no matter where you work, whether it's education, whether it's in the corporate sector, whether it's in nonprofit, whether it's in sport, whether, no matter what it is, this can be applied. And so it's sort of a lens to look at everything through. And that was sort of the pitch I made, and they seemed to like it.
How long was that program? Was that a year or two?
It was a year, and so the placement I chose was with U.S. Senator Patty Murray on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. It was a great experience. It was in 2016, which there was working for a Democrat, everyone was thinking. It had very different thoughts about how 2016 would go. So there was a lot of different momentum when that year came to a close. But I did have the opportunity to work on the team that got to dig into nominations. And so that was really fun. Learned a lot about research at the end of that from a nomination standpoint. And then I stayed on the Hill. I went over to Bobby Scott's office on the House side. So I was then getting Senate and House experience. And Mr. Scott was a fantastic member to work for. He is a lawyer and he loves to dig into like all the nitty gritty details. So you have to write really long memos and have everything cited. So like my research brain loved that. Um, and he was really trying to emerge as like a leader in disability. And so really being able to build up a portfolio for him was super fun.
One thing that, and I don't have the first ounce of experience in anything government or policy wise, but it seems like it ebbs and flows, obviously, with the political situation.
Yes.
So is it frustrating to have DI initiatives come to the forefront of people's thinking and then have them pushed back? And then is it almost like every 4 years, some of the work you do is like reversed?
It can. I mean, it is ebbs and flows. I will say the nice thing about disability and I'll add accessibility because they're a little bit different. They they're not as like political, big P political in the sense of like Democrat, Republican, because they're a little bit more bipartisan. And so some of the work halts. I'll say actually during election years, the work really halts across the board because everyone goes away. So that's almost like worse than whoever is in charge
Mm.
because everyone's focused on other things. And so like this year will be the hardest for like any work, 2016, 2020, those years where 2020 was odd just generally because of the pandemic. But those years are the hardest because of just work doesn't really happen. And so you sort of have to halt all the good things you're doing, redirect, and then pick them back up. But the good thing is, there's other ways to go about making change. And I think that's where over time, spending time in government, being able to see House, Senate, White House, I started to see what are the other levers outside of those really traditional policy like lenses, and then how else can you actually make change and like lasting change. And that's where I started to get more interested in how to help others to start to do that.
What projects during that experience did you find to be most impactful or that you're kind of most proud of working on?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many. I mean, it's funny because it's always like one step forward, two steps back in policy. But there's definitely projects that I'm really proud of and excited about still. And again, it takes so much time because government is like the slow moving machine. um, I would say one of the things I'm most proud of is the work on subminimum wage. And so I think so many people don't realize that it is legal to pay disabled workers less than the minimum wage. Not like some states have $15, so you're paid, $10. No, it's legal to pay workers with disabilities a penny an hour. And that for so long was sort of kept in the shadows. And there's been really substantial change across states since Mr. Scott introduced a bill, it was 2018 or 2019, on actually like starting to phase out subminimum wage. Now, that bill hasn't passed, but it provided a roadmap for states to start doing the work. And there's been this really big swing in states starting to do it. And that's fun to see. You're like, I did a thing. This is it. Um, and then I'm also really proud of the work. When I was in the White House, I led the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Executive Order, which was one of two massive sweeping executive orders that President Biden signed on day one. And so it was an all agency executive order. Again, huge EO, like note to self, not every single agency has to do everything. But it was really fun to like work with every agency from Department of Labor and Commerce and educate to like really, really, really small agencies with like 10 people. And to really talk about how do you move DEI, A for accessibility, forward and think about this in a meaningful way and start building their plans. And that was hard, 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 hard work. But it was also some of the most fun work that I did while I was there.
You said that disability is more bipartisan. So do you think
Mhm.
it's ever a disadvantage that it's grouped in with DEIA?
Mm, yeah,
Yeah,
I do.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it can be. That's why I think it's important to be like to sometimes separate those things out, actually. I like to say equity, access, and inclusion and just flip it around because that, or drop equity, because for some reason, sometimes the word equity is the most like triggering word for friends across the aisle. Don't ask me why. But sometimes just inclusion and access is like the right words to use. And
Yeah.
so, whatever semantics it may be, right? And it's a word game, but at the end of the day, my goal is to make sure that people with disabilities in the US have the same opportunities as non-disabled people in the US, have equal pay, and we actually can start to fulfill the outcomes of the ADA. I just think we've stagnated for so long. That's where we need to start moving forward. So yeah,
Yeah, I think obviously
whatever
on a
word
much
games. Yeah.
obviously on a much larger or smaller scale and maybe not quite as significant, but I kind of like the same way in my work with fitness. Like I think
Yeah.
the biggest issue is that people with disabilities just don't have opportunities. And you can break
Hmm.
down all the various barriers and facilitators to physical activity for individuals with disabilities, and there's no shortage of literature on
Yeah.
that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, I think, there needs to be more environments and more
Yes.
opportunities. So that's where like I think my gym has obviously a small local impact in my community, but like the course that we teach, we hope that it leads to other people opening facilities like ours.
Yeah.
Maybe going back to the sub minimum wage comment,
Yeah.
you've written some about socioeconomic status. I'm just going to look at some of
Hmm.
these statistics that you
Yeah.
cited. You wrote a post for the Century Foundation, and
Hmm.
you have that 21.6% of disabled people are considered poor under the census's
Hmm.
supplemental poverty measure compared to 10% of people without disabilities.
Yeah.
On average, workers with disabilities are paid 74 cents to the dollar for their non disabled peers, and that about nearly half of renters with any disability experienced housing insecurity. So, socioeconomic status is obviously a huge barrier for a lot of individuals with disabilities. And correct me if I'm wrong. So, my understanding is that a lot of people with disabilities can receive supplemental security income, so SSI, but that it places a threshold on how much you can make to qualify. So it essentially disincentivizes working because if you make too much, then you don't qualify. But then I was reading something that you wrote about Medicaid and how you have to demonstrate that you work at least 80 hours, is it a month, to qualify for that. So where's this balance between like incentivizing people with disabilities to work, disincentivizing them to work, and maybe what needs to change within the system to improve their work experience and improve their socioeconomic status?
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of efforts to try to like bad efforts to try to put work requirements on a lot of our benefits programs. And so there's been fight against that. But to the SSI piece, and honestly to all of this is one of the things I hear a lot is like, oh, well, our system is broken. Well, it's not really broken. It's actually working exactly as it is, which is to trap disabled people in poverty, which is really terrible. But when you have a cap on how much you can have in savings for SSI, which is a grossly inadequate amount that nobody can possibly live on, then of course the system is working as it should. And when that has been changed or even elevated with inflation, then yeah, the system is working as it should and it is trapping people. And so there's a balance. We need our benefits programs. We need our benefits programs to be realistic about helping people and anyone, right? Because I'm going to go broad sweeping with benefits programs here. Because there's also, we could group in SNAP, we can group in Medicaid, we can group in, I mean, there's a lot that are really, really important. And these programs all need to be lifting people up. But then you hit a threshold where someone may want to do more work, right? So sub-minimum wage, let's say somebody's been sort of trapped in a low, very low wage, but now they want to go out and make some more money. Maybe they might get insurance through that works for them through their employer. And that's going to kick them off some of these programs. There needs to be benefits counseling and support to make that transition successfully. And a little sneak preview, I'm working with New America, a DC-based think tank, and we have a report that will be coming out in February that actually does a big look at sort of the state of states on sub-minimum wage, comprehensive supports, benefits counseling, and gives a little bit of a ranking and score on how states are doing on this. And as a preview to sort of the results, comprehensive supports make a big difference, and it can actually help states to make lasting change.
So you think so it's more at the state level than the national level?
I mean, the national level, I think, would be great to make some change, but Medicaid is going to always be a state-driven program. And then a lot of the benefits counseling does go down to the state level. So I think we can drive systems to start making that change, but a lot of it is going to be up to our states to kind of do that. Now, some minimum wage is one thing that can be done at the federal level. We can get that done, we can eliminate that. But at the end of the day, some of the employment initiatives, some of the benefits programs, we can drive states and incentivize states to start making change, but they are going to have to be the real, drivers of actually doing it and kind of taking that initiative and those incentives to kind of cross that finish line.
Accenture published a report, I believe it was with Disability
Mm-hmm.
In, about the
Yeah.
benefits of hiring a more diverse
Mm-hmm.
workforce.
It's a great report.
What have you found, or maybe what did you learn from that report and the work that you do if you're trying to convince a business to be more diverse in their hiring practices or make accessibility improvements? Kind of what are the key things that you're trying to communicate to them?
Yeah, definitely. Well, Accenture's done, I think, 2 reports maybe. And I don't remember which one it is, but one of them talks about like more disabled people in the workforce actually raises the overall GDP of the country significantly. I mean, it's a big bump, which is incredible because you think about, I mean, this is an economic case, honestly, and that's actually one of the things to go to a company with is say, this is an economic case for you, right? You are not only doing a good thing that feels good, right? But you're actually bringing in an entire population of people that is benefiting the economy. And so this is a driver to the local economy because you're going to have more money in the pockets of people that are now buying your products oftentimes. So you're actually building a customer base as well. And you have more workers who have shown, disabled workers actually have history of having higher retention, and tend to have a lot of other really positive workforce benefits. So there's some really good economic cases to be made of just hiring disabled workers. It's also a population that right now is underemployed and oftentimes has advanced degrees and others. So it's like disabled workers tend to be a population that just are not well skill matched due to places not hiring people with disabilities. So you can often find people for like unique jobs if you actually are willing to open your search and just honestly make usually free accommodations. That's the big thing companies often are afraid of is accommodations, but I think we know most accommodations are free and the rest are typically under $500 for a one-time cost.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that holds a lot of gyms back, and I've talked about it on a bunch of different
Mm-hmm.
episodes, that you just assume that like accessibility is some sweeping, drastic overhaul of equipment
Yeah.
and everything, and really it can be more of a social, emotional, and a policy type of
Mm-hmm.
modifications, and like you said, just accommodations. How can you contrast? So I read reports that disabled spenders have X amount of money to contribute, so how do I want to phrase this? So there's a lot of consumer spending by people with disabilities, but then you also
Yep.
have the statistics showing that they're lower socioeconomic status. So not that it has to be
Yeah.
one or the
Right.
other, but and you don't want to group all people with disabilities
No.
into like one group, but are you portraying to companies that there's this target market that they're not addressing by not creating a more accessible product? Is that one of the like paths or avenues that you would
Yeah,
discuss?
I mean, definitely. It is true. It's hard when 1 in 4 adults in the country is disabled. It's really hard to be like, oh, people with disabilities, because everyone's different. I mean, I have chronic illnesses. Most people looking at me wouldn't know I'm disabled, right? And so I could mask pretty well most of the time. I mean, you wouldn't know that I just did my infusion this morning, right? Like my accommodation is that on certain days I need to work from home, which now I work from home all the time. But like, that's like an accommodation I need. But again, I don't represent, just as you open the show, like I don't represent all people with disabilities, and I would never try to. But that also means somebody who uses a wheelchair doesn't represent me either, because our needs are so different. And so I think that's the big thing, is thinking about how do companies think about not only universal design, but inclusive design, which are two really different things. And for both of those, both like for their retail spaces, for their hiring, for their products, and really thinking about both of those in everything that they're doing. So it's creating accessible policies for their recruitment, hiring, retention, and then also for their outward, customer base as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's maybe you can kind of help me sort out this thought process a little bit, but one
Yeah.
thing I see in the fitness space a lot is that programs for people with disabilities are free.
Hmm.
And maybe it's my bias from running a for-profit like fitness
Yeah.
center that incorporates a lot of people with disabilities, and we're also fortunate to be in maybe a higher socioeconomic status area where a lot of my clients are still supported by their families. So can
Yeah.
preface it with that way that we have those advantages, and those aren't barriers for a lot of our clients, like the financial and stuff. But
Yes.
is there any negative that you could see from this, I guess, trend of programs for people with disabilities all need to be free?
Hmm.
I guess maybe do you have any specific like first reaction to, I guess, that idea?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always two sides to everything, right? And I actually have seen and had a lot of conversations with people about having like sliding scales on almost everything. And so rather than just saying everything is free, it's how do whatever the thing that is free may be, it's actually no, it may be like pro bono essentially for some, and then it has a cost for others, and it might be a sliding, and then so different clients pay different amounts, and
Yeah.
that's the reality and honestly of most services anymore. And so actually thinking about it that way. So for somebody who's on and receiving SSI, yeah, it might be free, and because when you have only $2,000 in your pocket, um, you cannot pay for an additional service that you desperately need. But when you are working at a top tech company and maybe you're a VP with a disability, yeah, you might be able to like shell out and pay a little bit, right? So I think finding that balance and also finding what's right is a piece of it. But again, there's going to be multiple thoughts, and it just sort of like it's going to depend on the product too.
Yeah, I think maybe, and mine's more just the fitness lens, but like maybe my
Yeah.
issue is that like you're just it's diagnostic based and not needs based. So like you said, it's
Yes.
a sliding scale. So I would prefer to see it be not here's a program that meets once a week
Yep.
for everyone with a disability. It's free. And then you
Yes.
get to the point where it's like, what type of disability do you need? How disabled do you have to
Right.
be to qualify? And that kind of makes all these gray areas. And like at my
Yes.
gym, price is never going to be a barrier. If someone comes to me and they
Right.
want to train, like we're going to make those exceptions.
You're going to
But
train them.
I would say the dozen people who are on scholarship at our program, most of them don't have disabilities. So it's like, and again,
that's
different
real.
socioeconomic areas, you
Right.
provide what the individual needs, but it's almost like, and issues too strong of a word, and I don't mean to be like negative towards it, but I sometimes see stuff that goes viral. Sometimes like individual opens gym for people with disabilities
Yes.
that's free, and that stuff's great and it's well intentioned, but it almost like marginalizes people with
It
disabilities
does.
by like reframing this perspective of like
Mm-hmm.
charity case to a degree. So
Yes.
I
I
don't know
think
if I
that's
have
actually exactly right.
yeah, I don't know if I have an
Like,
answer, but it's
yeah.
just something that like it's hard to communicate without sounding negative. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure what exactly the answer is, but it's just something that I see and I think about.
Yeah, I think that's actually exactly right. Because again, you don't want things to go into like, I don't know if this is okay to say in your podcast, but like inspiration porn.
Yep. Yeah, a lot
You
of
know,
people have said
and
it. So
yeah, okay. But like that's what I think sometimes things become.
yeah,
And you don't want that or to be doing it just simply to go viral, which I do think happens all the time. And or to get the news story. And at the end of the day, the goal of the ADA is like equal opportunity, right? And so it should be equal. And but at the same time, that does mean there's going to need to be exceptions for anyone, disability or not. And so I think, I don't know, I do like universal design in the thought of that, of like, what is going to make this accessible, broad term accessible to actually everyone, disability or not, and then how do you then scale that?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think that I think that's an important thing to figure out for all businesses is kind of how
Yeah,
can you
I do.
provide like can you provide a needs based assistance and how can
Yeah,
you I guess vet different inquiries and how can you
yeah.
support clients with different levels. But another aspect of barriers and facilitators I suppose would be transportation. You were on
Hmm.
a round table.
Yeah,
Was it last year?
yeah.
With the Department of Transportation. What were you guys addressing, or what were you kind of working on?
Yeah, it was a great roundtable. The vice president was there, Department of Transportation, a number of folks from DOT, and it was really digging into. Actually, there were so many people. Not everyone even had a chance to speak, but it was great to kind of engage with a lot of folks. We were really talking about like what can and will DOT be doing to move forward many of the issues of the community around accessible, reliable, affordable transportation. Airlines was obviously a top topic. A lot of the other issues didn't get quite as much attention. Now, I will say, I do think it's really important to think about transportation within communities because if you have an accessible or really great gym, if you have an accessible store, but nobody can get to it, that is a problem. So I think it's important to think about all modes of transportation being accessible. Sidewalks, neighborhoods, sort of like the urban planning view of it. That I think is a really important part of it, not just airlines. Um, but airlines has been just in the kind of limelight, I will just say, because of all the problems and the just huge amount of damaged mobility devices. I mean, it's a lot, and so I think it's important that DOT is taking some pretty aggressive action there. I would expect we'll continue to see more. So there's talk about future regulations and other actions that they'll be taking. I hope that gets done by the end of this term. I know there's a tight timeline, so more will be done there. But I think he has it's a good agency with a big agenda ahead of them, and so I think they have some direction that they'll be taking. So I'm excited to see what comes of it. So
I didn't even want to try to say Pete's last name because I knew I was going to butcher it when I was
Buttigieg,
when I was prefacing the talking point. So um,
yeah.
so your role with the White House was completely new, right? You were the first one to
Hmm.
kind of
Yeah.
occupy that position. How did that come about? How were you determined to be the person for that role?
I don't know to speak to the latter, but I can
Mm-hmm.
definitely speak to the first. So in President Biden's like platform when he was candidate Biden, and in a couple of the other platforms as well. It included actually naming somebody to the Domestic Policy Council to drive disability policy. This was a really top priority of the disability community throughout the campaigns back, in 2020. I had seen that. It's funny because I was on the Hill, so I had to be working on the Hill. I had to be fairly removed from the campaigns. It's a obviously legal issue. So I had seen that. I thought it was really cool. I honestly hadn't really given a whole lot of thought. I had a couple people that were like, "Would you be interested in this position if it happens?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean that'd be cool, but like I don't think that'll happen." And I loved working for Senator Patty Murray. I mean, she was also just an amazing boss. I'm from the West Coast. There's kind of the Patty Murray family. It's a thing. So I really didn't think I'd be leaving the Senate. We had a big agenda. I don't know, COVID was consuming everything. And so it just, I don't know, my mind wasn't actually thinking about going to the admin. Then came the end of December, early January, President Biden won, and I got a call. I think it was like at 10 p.m. one night, maybe like a Thursday night. And it was somebody from the transition team that was like, "Hey, we're interested in you for this position. Can we do a quick interview right now?" Sure. Great. So we had a call. We talked about a few things, talk about on a whim. And then they were like, "Great, great, great. We'll be in touch with next steps." So then got a ping and it was like, "Hey, Saturday at 7 p.m., can you do an interview with Ambassador Susan Rice?" Just like, "Sure, great. What do you wear to a 7 p.m. interview?" That was a trip. Um, and also Susan Rice, like, woo. And so, yeah, did that. And then by Sunday, I had an offer to go work in the White House. And it was like, I think that next week was maybe January 6th. So talk about a whirlwind of a couple weeks. I went and cleaned out my office in the Senate while there were tanks outside. So yeah. Yeah.
How did that transition affect your day-to-day life, your work? Did projects like immediately shift directions? I guess what did you guys start working on once Biden occupied the
Yeah.
presidency?
I mean, the nice, like, for Senator Murray stuff was able to just like keep rolling, but everything again was like COVID. So like some of the big work I had going on there was able to be halted and then like kept going. I had a Kennedy fellow, and so she was able to like keep things moving. So that was all like rolling, and so that was good. I was remote at the time in the Senate and then stayed remote. So the White House staff, we stayed remote until July, unless you were like in the West Wing. And yeah, so we launched an admin fully remote work. So anyone who says you can't do remote work is wrong. Because you can launch an entire admin from remote work. And I mean, a lot of people talk to the Obama team who formerly had their roles, and they got like a roadmap of what to do, how to do it, who to talk to, how to manage the agency they oversaw, etc. But I was standing up an entire new position that was disability policy across the entire Domestic Policy Council, which is every single agency. And, this whole new policy platform essentially for the president. So I was starting out a little bit with, trying to figure out what to do. My goal was to first pull together all the different agencies that had disability folks at them and then start expanding. So quickly launched an interagency policy committee on disability, and that grew and expanded and still continues today, where it's a monthly meeting of agencies talk about disability policy. With subcommittee meetings, the COVID guidance that actually named long COVID a disability came out of one of those subcommittee meetings. And it was one of the fastest moving cross agency pieces of guidance. So, fast work. We went we went quick and handled a lot of stuff. So it was great. It was a trip. My health totally crashed, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Was that committee predominantly people that are already in government, or was it leveraging the voice of people with disabilities themselves? Were you bringing in a variety and a diverse kind of collection of people?
So that committee specifically was agency folks, so like already in the government. It did actually have a lot of the staff that identified, career and political staff that identified as disabled in the government. Um, and then I also did a lot of meetings, even though I was on the policy side and there's a whole part of the White House that does public outreach, I still did a lot of meetings with stakeholders to make sure I was bringing in the perspectives of stakeholders to like represent the voice of the community. So that way I wasn't doing anything that was going to like be completely out of step. I mean, it was also hard because when I got named, there were a lot of people that said I wasn't disabled enough to be in that position. There was a lot of like really cruel emails sent, which are now part of the presidential record.
Hmm.
Um, there was, a lot of things said that like I did not represent enough of the community. And that was a really hard thing to be getting at the very beginning of an administration when you're launching a new position and to just try to like push through it.
Yeah. How did you receive those and kind of deal with them? Because I don't get uh, emails like that yet. Hopefully, maybe ever. But it is one thing that
Yeah,
I'm like very hyper vigilant of, is that I don't have a disability, and that's why we start the show by saying that I'm not
yeah,
intending to speak on behalf of anyone. But like
yeah,
I do feel like I'm in a somewhat unique position to influence, if we just look at fitness as a whole, like more gyms to be
yeah,
accessible. So if I just say like, oh, I don't have a disability, that's not my fight, then it never gets done, or someone else
right,
would have to pick it up. So it's hard.
right.
Like, I guess, how can you be an advocate or an ally while also appreciating that you don't have that lived experience? It's something like in my LinkedIn feed is just a ton of professionals with disabilities, and that's where
Yeah,
I try to learn from that stuff. But sometimes the posts are always like, can't be about us without us, and I'm just like, I'm not trying to be without you, but
yes,
I'm also
yes,
trying to accomplish what I can. So I guess, how do
yeah,
you walk that line between being an advocate um, without infringing upon other people's
yeah.
experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is I tried to own my own experience a little bit more and tried to start being more open, which was hard for me because I mean, I was coming from the perspective of a staffer on the Hill, which you're supposed to be invisible, right? As a staffer on the Hill, you're supposed to be up against the wall, seen, not heard, unless your boss talks to you. You are on background when you talk to reporters. You are not the public person. So I had people around me in my close circle knew that I had chronic illnesses, and in particular, knew in 2019 my health had like really, really crashed. I'd started doing infusions in early 2020, and like you could visibly see through 2019 to 2020 that like I could not mask as much anymore, and like I was visibly sick. And so I tried to start when I stepped into the role in the White House. I tried to start like owning and actually naming that I was part of the community a little bit more. Um, Even though that was really hard for me because again, like I'd never been a person that was like more at the forefront of things. Um, and it was a totally new role to actually like not be on background and be named in articles and go through that process. It was almost like an identity crisis a little bit because I had to start like being a human like myself, like find my own voice, not just be the voice of all the people I worked for. I still was helping the president, but I still also had to like find out who I was. And always say, I am speaking for myself, I'm speaking for my experiences. And then make sure that no matter what I did, I was talking to a lot of other people in the community and work with OPE to bring in all of those perspectives because otherwise it just would have been out of step. I don't, I've definitely learned over the past few years, there's going to be critics, there's going to be criticism. I'm always going to get slammed for something anymore. And the roles I've been in, people don't like me for various reasons. And that is just going to, and then other people do. And I have learned to sort of live with that through a lot of coaching from people who've been in these roles before. So
You mentioned that you were kind of visibly sick during that time, but
yeah,
your disability is predominantly not visible. What do you
yeah,
think people get wrong, like etiquette or assumption wise, regarding
yeah.
invisible illnesses? And do you like that term? Because I do see some people say that they don't like the term invisible illness.
I usually use chronic illness. I'm not super particular, but I usually use chronic illness or illnesses because I have several. Um, yeah, I think people get wrong that it's 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 invisible and it doesn't exist when I look fine. You know what I mean? Rather than I can be actually sick even if I look okay. And I think there's an assumption that I'm just because I'm out and about and I'm doing things that I'm fine. And in reality, that's actually not. That's pretty rarely the case. I'm pretty good at putting on makeup and doing my hair and putting on nice clothes and getting out and about because I've had to do that for so long. Um, but in reality, my body can be in not a good place. And I've just learned over time to hide it pretty well. But I went to a holiday thing with a bunch of people, friends from the Hill and everything. And the amount of people that came up and said, I have not seen this much color on your face and you looking this good in years. And it's true, my health is actually in a really, really good place right now. And they all, I mean, every person I saw actually commented on the difference in how I looked. And so for the first time, they saw a noticeable difference. And that was actually really telling to me, is the amount of people that really noticed that.
Was that one of the reasons why you wanted to leave working in government?
It is honestly, as much as I love the White House, and I loved working for Susan Rice, I consider her a mentor, a friend. I would, you know, go to the moon for her if she asked me to. And I got to staff President Biden in the Oval. How many people get to do that? I mean, that was incredible. Um, he called my name out during an ADA event. I
I
mean,
saw
there's
that.
some
That's cool.
really wild experiences I've had that I will write a book someday. But it's at the end of the day, it just my health couldn't manage it. I mean, I think we all know the White House is physically an old building. It also, the work functions in a very kind of old model of you work until you break. And my body just broke earlier than others. And after 14 months, my doctor had a real conversation with me that I was probably going to be hospitalized if I didn't take a break.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to manage because you've worked so hard to get to where you wanted to be, and
Yeah,
you want to have the influence that you were in the position to have.
yeah,
I was reading earlier this week or over the weekend. Digital accessibility has been something that's been very prominent in my LinkedIn space and the various things I've been
yeah,
reading about. And it's funny because it was an article about how the federal websites are trying to adhere to digital accessibility guidelines,
yeah.
and to me, it's if the government can't even be
Yep.
digitally
Shouldn't they have already?
accessible, yeah, how can you expect a business like mine that's three people, none of us of which have any website design? How can you expect us to be fully compliant when at the federal level they're not even? So, like you mentioned, the ADA has come a long way, but and
Hmm.
I don't believe ADA has specific digital guidelines. I know that's WCAG. But I guess where would you like to see accessibility kind of focus on or trend in the coming years? Trend makes it
Yeah,
seem like it's transient, and I know
yeah,
it's not transient, but what do you think are the most
yeah,
pertinent issues?
yeah. Well, I am excited to hopefully see the web access rule, which focuses on local and state governments, get done. So that's from DOJ. It's regulation. because yeah, federal governments are trying to comply with 508, and you know, it's state and local. If having the web access rule would be huge to get them in compliance, and I think it also sets that rule, should it be finalized, could set a sort of glide path for small businesses like us, right? And show us like how can we do it? And also for big tech companies, because I do think the next phase would be Title III, and so that would be everyone, to come into compliance, because I do think everything is digital now. I mean, I don't, we all have phones. We order food off our phones. We order, transportation. You walk in to many places, I love a good coffee shop. Half of them you go into, you actually order off a screen anymore. So if we don't start getting our tech into compliance, whether it's a website or it's an app, we're again, talk about an economic case, you're ruling out and eliminating a whole customer base. And so I do think that's important, but I agree, it's actually not easy. I don't really have coding experience. When I was making my own website for Unlock Access, I used Wave. It's a website checker for accessibility. And so like every page I made, I would publish, check it through Wave, go back, fix things, do the next one, publish, check it through Wave, publish, and I can't do the coding. So it was just like simply going through the website designer doing it. But that's a lot of time, and like not everyone can do that. And it's tricky too, because like there's just some things that like, it's hard. So I think tech is sort of the next phase. But I do want to caveat, I do not want the ADA opened. I think that should all be done through rulemaking. I think the ADA should be left alone and not touched. And everything should be done through rulemaking, because the ADA is a sacred document that should just remain as is.
When I was more naive to it and starting our website for the nonprofit, like I
Mhm.
paid to have UserWay add your digital
Yeah,
accessibility overlay. I was like, oh wow, this is great.
yeah,
It looks so awesome. And their salespeople, their marketing people, and then recently Level Access bought uh, UserWay. I believe it's
yeah.
Level Access if I'm correct. And everyone's up in arms like, oh, like overlays are not
The worst thing
accessible.
ever.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
the worst thing in the world. And Level Access has 25 years plus of like a prestigious reputation like promoting digital accessibility. So I'd like to believe, or at least give them the benefit of the doubt, that they're not acquiring UserWay just to sell overlays. I assume they identify that it's a solution and they want to be part of, or they identify that's a problem and they want to be part of the solution. Um, but it's quite the landscape right now in my
it
feeds.
is.
Everyone is not too fond of that, but
Hmm.
I'm interested to see kind of how that develops.
Yeah. Yeah, I think coding, and there's a number of startups that are really getting into like supporting changing coding and helping, you know, build on more access. And I'm excited to see where the kind of like startup industry goes on that.
Yeah,
Because I think that is going to be a really like bringing in a startup to help you is going to be a real benefit.
yeah, absolutely. Now that
Yeah.
you've transitioned out of government, we will talk about the project that you're currently working on. So, Unlock Access. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about it?
Yeah, yeah. So in December, I launched Unlock Access LLC, which is my own consulting firm. I'm really excited to do this. It was scary to go out on my own. You might have felt the same way when you started your business, but especially for so long, I'd been part of these like big entities, being in government and others. But what I really decided is I love conversations with folks about how can I help them on their accessibility learning journey? Do they are they at the beginning? Are they just learning how to be accessible? Are they develop their initial accessibility policies? Are they wanting to become a national leader in disability and accessibility? Do they want to develop a policy to kind of lay the foundation of the direction they want to go? Do they want to build a coalition? Do they want to bring folks together to have conversations? Do they want trainings to really dig in? Education being my background, I love a good training. So that's the stuff that actually was like really exciting me every day. And as much as I love research and doing that, I just helping others to really like find their path towards the inward reflection or the outward customer base of, you know, equity, access, and inclusion is what was really exciting to me. So I launched, and my focus is really kind of that corporate customer base. But I am also talking to some folks in the nonprofit sector as I can help them on their disability policy focus as well. And having some conversations and enjoying my clients so far.
Yeah, and I guess I've never really had a job. I taught for a couple of years, but where my time was victims too strong, but held victim by a specific company. So now
Yes.
I've been self-employed since I started my career, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But it's
Yeah.
definitely a different feeling of, instead of you being confined by a specific schedule,
Hmm.
I'm confined by like the influx of responsibilities and
Yes.
possibilities of things that I could be working on. And it's been
Yep.
really hard for me to turn off, I guess, because I know there's always someone I can connect with, or a project I
Yes.
can work on, or problem I can try to come up with a solution for, versus being an employee and having a specific task at hand. Sometimes I am envious of that type of position. So I'll be interested to see how you find the two, to compare working on your own versus
Yeah.
working as part of a team. Are you going to have a team with Unlock Access, or at least initially will it just be yourself?
Initially, it'll just be me. I've had incredible outreach asking if I'm hiring,
Hmm.
and at some point potentially, but I think just me. I really want to kind of build up my clients, especially this first few months, and then see if others, I want to expand. But I think for now, just me. But yeah, I am really enjoying the sort of like, oh, I don't have to be glued to a desk just to be glued to a desk. I can do work. I've always been like a 7-day work week type of a person where I'm like, oh, I have time on a Saturday, I'll just like crank this out. But then if I need to go do something in the middle of a work day, then that's okay. There's that flexibility is something that I'm actually really looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. We
Yeah.
wrap up a lot of these episodes with more fitness specific.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts as to what gyms, health clubs, etc., can do to be more accessible or inclusive for people with disabilities?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is again not being afraid of accessibility. Like we were talking about kind of accommodations and accessibility. It is so much of a belief in all of the people coming through the door are going to be really great, either employees or customers. And so make that entrance accessible, and I'm talking about a broad look at that, right? And change the way you view the person coming in to experience your gym. Think about what are the easy things you can do to make equipment, to make an accommodation on your equipment or your classes. What stigma are are you facing that is making this difficult? And seek out a training for staff. Sometimes that is like the first step. And then moving forward from there. I like to use the curb cut example that curb cuts were created by the ADA, and now everyone uses a curb cut, parent pushing a stroller, delivery person with a dolly, traveler with a bag. We just need to start curb cutting everything.
Absolutely. I feel like that's a great way to wrap it up. Tim, thank you. It was really an honor to talk to you. I was a little astonished when you agreed to this conversation, but I'm very appreciative of it. And I hope people that are listening found some takeaways from our conversation and are inspired to take action and advocate on behalf of people with disabilities, and kind of identify maybe locally in their community where they can start to enact some change. So, again, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Right on an hour.